Hi everybody, it's 8:30 on the dot, so we're going to start. Um, I hope you can all see my screen and see me and hear me okay. If at any point you can't, just please let us know in the chat. Our topic for today, as part of the Futurist series at Fractal, is Beyond the Curve. The curve, of course, relating to the COVID curve. But today here, we're not here to talk about COVID as a disease, but rather what consumer mindsets are emerging in the world since we have been affected by COVID. We are going to be joined by two incredible speakers today. And so as you can see, probably Kalindi and Anurag can wave out to you. Kalindi is the Director of Consumer and Market Insights at North America Division of Colgate-Palmolive. She has got 19 years of experience, design degree, business degree, behavioral science degree. She's got everything that you would want to hear about. And she's been focused on consumer needs and bringing that into foresight and innovation at Colgate for all these many years. Anurag, as some of you might already know if you are at Fractal, but for any of you who are not, Anurag is the Chief Practice Officer for the Behavioral Science and Design team at Fractal. He's also one of the co-founders of Final Mile Consulting. And he, in his non-office time, is found traveling, reading, discovering, scuba diving, has a very, very rich life full of F1 and whatnot. So it's going to be really exciting to hear from both of them today. Just a few sort of quick hygiene factors before we begin. Everyone who's on as an audience member is going to be in a listen-only capacity, but that doesn't mean you can't engage with us. So please, you will see a little Q&A box or a chat down in the Zoom tools. So please, throughout the conversation, feel free to drop in questions, thoughts, curiosities, anything that you might have to ask us or tell us. And we'll be sure to include them in our conversation with Anurag and Kalindi. Also, this session is going to be recorded. Yeah, if you have any questions throughout, just drop it in. Or any concerns, any challenges hearing us as well. I'm Shivani, and I'm going to be your host and partial speaker as well for today. I'm a senior behavior architect with Fractal. I work very closely with Anurag and the whole team here. I've done some work in CPG, some in finance, some in the development sector, and some in healthcare. And I'm really excited to be sharing with you a report that we put together in June earlier this year, and everything that's happened since then, right? So as you can see, we have some interesting visuals here to capture all the different industries that we had looked at. So we started out by, studying what the experiences of consumers were all across the world. We had some first-hand accounts, and additional to that, we did literature reviews, we did observational studies, and a whole lot of synthesis as a team. To really get into, what are the underlying motivations of people right now? What are the behavioral shifts? How are people thinking? And how are they feeling? So I hope as audience members, you might be designers, you might be data scientists, you might be business leaders, but whoever you are, I'm sure you're a consumer as well. So maybe for today, you can put on different hats and try to engage with us from different spaces. So to begin, it's been about 6 to 8 to 9 months, depending on which part of the world you're in, since COVID has started to have an impact on our everyday life. So if you could just take a minute and just think about, how have you been feeling in these last 6 to 8 months? What emotions have you been going through? What has your thought process been with regards to what you are consuming? I've got a couple of emotion words here, and I wonder if any of these resonate with you. They most definitely resonate with me. I think fatigued is a common feeling that a lot of us are experiencing, where you almost feel chronically tired of something or someone or some place. A vulnerable is, of course, we're all physically as well as psychologically vulnerable to a lot of threat right now. Overwhelmed with regards to, the amount of guidelines we have to deal with, the amount of suggestions from, WhatsApp groups and authorities and friends and co-workers and everyone, right? So just an overall sense of of being drained and overwhelmed. We're all vigilant, which means that we're all kind of on guard at all times. We're isolated. Even if we do have a family member or some people around living with us, we are isolated from our social networks and the context that we used to live in. We're skeptical about all products, people, places that we're in. At the same time, I think a lot of people have also started to feel appreciative of things that they have, of some privileges that we might be enjoying, the kind of living settings that some of us might have. A lot of us clearly have internet access and are able to be on this video call, which means we are better off than a large part of the population. Appreciative that maybe people are safe and you're safe. Appreciative of small pleasures, like I remember someone once told me recently that the joy that she's experienced lately has been having ice cream, and she could never imagine that such a small experience would matter to her. But yeah, insecure is basically that you don't know where to look for actual credible information. So you're constantly kind of insecure about the decisions you're making, right? You don't know whether you're wearing the right mask, you don't know whether you're doing the right things. At the same time, you don't know if other people have moved on to newer ways of being and you're not catching up. Maybe you're on video calls and you don't know how your house is looking to your coworkers. How are you dressed? How should you be dressed? So there's all of these new contexts, and we all have to kind of quickly adapt to it as well, which is where we're kind of getting more accepting as consumers and as individuals. We are trying to find meaning in smaller experiences. People are trying to find purpose in different places than they did before. So what's interesting, I think, about all of these emotions and these states that we're in are that they're not stable necessarily, nor are they exclusive, right? It's not that you are feeling just any one of these on a given day or a given week. You might be feeling isolated and accepting, or feeling insecure and overwhelmed and vulnerable and appreciative even at the same time. And so it's a very interesting time to look at how decisions are being made, right? Because it's such an amalgamation of emotions that aren't really going away anytime soon. So I'm going to take a quick small detour as to why I'm talking so much about emotions and how they relate to the decision making of consumers, right? So the two things to kind of oversimplify and talk about how decisions are made is that it's literally the person into the situation that matters, right? And the situation we're all in for the first time is shared. And that is kind of governing, what preferences we have towards what brands, what channel for where we're shopping, who we're buying from, what we're buying, what we're doing with what we're buying, how long we use it, when we replace it. So all of these things, right? And you might have noticed that the behaviors that you have in the last 6 months are not really what you had before. And some behaviors of yours have been pervasive despite everything changing, right? So none of your decisions are made in a vacuum. They're all related to the situation you're in and the person you are and the context you're in. So that brings us quickly to some aspects of COVID as a context, right? And again, no matter where you are in the world, some of these factors are going to be common. And this is the shared context that all of our decisions are being made in. So the first one is that, there's a looming uncertainty. You don't know, again, what is right, what is wrong. You don't know what to expect. Add that into the fact that there are strained resources, resources at an official level, be it a government or, healthcare systems are overloaded, and at a personal level as well, right? Be it finances, your attention, every kind of resource is at a stretch, and you're bound to kind of snap somewhere with those two things. The second sort of combination of context that you're dealing with is that the threat is not it is not a tangible threat, right? And as human beings, we haven't evolved to deal with such an abstract threat. We're used to threat coming from like a large animal or a person, or like food that's gone bad, but evolutionary wise, we're not prepared for this threat at all. So the fact that it's diffused, it's passive, it's outside of us makes us want to blame someone for it, right? So as soon as you hear that someone has COVID, you will immediately say that, okay, yeah, this happened because this person did this or that person didn't do that, right? So you're very quick to find blame because we're constantly vigilant and it's exhausting. The second element of it is that your precautions aren't assuring you protection, right? This is not a case where you will be sure that if you do the right things, you will not come under this threat, right? So all of that put together with the fact that it's a lasting, non-episodic sort of threat, and that it's unfamiliar to everyone, right? Nobody really knows. Every day there are new symptoms. Every day there are new, sort of signs of it, and every day we're finding out new things. Old things are getting disproved. New things are coming into the frame, and all of it is just very overwhelming and confusing. So where does that leave us, right, as consumers making decisions? So we're left with one and overall, narrow focus. When I say narrow, I mean we're quite focused on the present. We're thinking not so much about, savings of the future and pension, because it just seems too distant from us as people. A lot of people might be even engaging in slightly more risky behaviors or risky decisions because they're thinking like, okay, it's here and now, so let me just do this thing right and get through this period of time. So narrow focus is an interesting one because it affects your decisions in many different aspects of your life. The second part is that you're distrustful towards other people, other authorities. If you notice, you might have seen that with some of your friends and some of your family members, depending on who is behaving like you and resonating with your way of being, you feel like you trust them more, right? Restaurants that are displaying the same sort of criteria for deliveries are restaurants you tend to trust. Brands that are showing that they actually care in the way that you do are brands that you trust. So otherwise, you're starting from defaulting to distrust. And the last one is that, eventually none of us are designed to be in a state of fear or arousal or anxiety for too long, right? And so none of us can deal with the fact that we're in this survival mode for too long. So you will see that everyone is learning to adapt. Everyone is finding their own way to navigate the situation. So that was all of the mindsets that we had. And these were a couple of key implications that we had put out in June for different businesses, right? Now, be it CPG, retail, healthcare, tech, media, health, we had finance as well. And so all of these are a few key ones, for example, be the connector for the socially starved, set the new benchmark for transparency and responsibility, leverage what gains trust now, be present where no one else is, be the negotiator for who's overwhelmed. So all of these were a sort of compiled list of implications. And I'm going to show you, since we put out the report, we've, as a team, been looking for signs, because that's what anyone who works on foresight and design strategy does. I think they look for signs of proof of things that might have come true, things that they were wrong about. So again, the idea of the document and this conversation was to prepare businesses and not really predict the future. So here are a couple of, I'm going to take you through these really quickly and then get right into the conversation with Anurag and Kalindi. But just before that, here what you see is that the way food is being packaged, delivered, consumed, experienced has all changed a lot in the last 6 to 8 months. For example, Chipotle in the US has been doing Zoom parties with different celebrities that you can join. So people who have been feeling a little lonely are able to engage with many more people than they could before. If anyone has seen the Amul Panchamrit, it's basically like a prasad, which is a religious sweet, and it has now started coming in this bite-sized package. And it's really interesting because people associated it with being, homemade and handmade, but that was starting to feel very, very unsafe. And so this has become an alternative. So, it's quite an interesting one where even something like religious sweets have been affected. Of course, we're seeing a lot more robot deliveries and robots involved in our food. A lot of Michelin star restaurants have now started giving you DIY kits for your house, which would have been unimaginable because the reason you go to a Michelin star restaurant is for the experience. But now, a lot more people, as you can see, I think one of the Google trends was that flour is the most Googled word recently. So all of these are interesting trends. If you see, Twitter has recently started giving you cues for misinformation. And one of the sort of preparedness things that we had suggested was that platforms should now take a stand, and people can't be neutral, brands can't be neutral anymore because consumers expect more. Even trigger warnings have evolved from just talking about mental health and the type of content to also telling you that, hey, this post might contain disturbing information about COVID or relevant information about COVID, so you can kind of filter through better. EduTech, as you see, there's been a great shift into the number of people studying and learning online. It's not just kids, but overall, apps like Duolingo have seen a huge increment in the number of people that are on there, that are learning to go and study. So it's interesting that, this context hasn't taken away anyone's desire to grow or get better, but rather probably fueled it. And it's so much more visible that people around you are also upskilling and reskilling. So there's a certain pressure to do that. Interestingly, everyone talked about at the beginning of COVID how experiences are going to die out. No one's going to go to the mall. No one's going to eat out anymore. But as we can see, that's not the case. Instead, we are moving back to some traditional ways of, drive-in theaters and spaced out concerts and foot pedals for buttons and dinner pods, which are all interesting. And clearly people are not willing to stop going out. So it's come down to, an aspect of mental health now where that becomes the trade-off, right? We have the fact that governments and technology is going to evolve to the point that it will be pervasive. And now, because we're thinking about safety versus privacy, we're willing to make the trade-off and give in to safety. But that doesn't mean that, once maybe COVID goes away, these technologies are going to leave us, right? So overall, there's a lower standard for privacy and security now, which makes it an interesting time for e-commerce and anyone looking at the digital space to reach out to customers. We're seeing a trend of people doing a lot more at home, 3D printing, cooking. So just, maybe looking at becoming a supplier of raw materials as well. As you can see, there is a lot of stuff in the digital space that is looking at connection. The lines between what is professional and personal, is blurring. Teams now has GIFs and memes. Zoom has breakout rooms. Miro has presentation skills now. So everyone is kind of upping their game because every platform needs to kind of do that right now. So the last sort of slide I have, and now I'm getting into my conversation with Anurag and Kalindi, is, keeping all of this in mind, is there any business or any type of business that you think is COVID proof? And if so, what attributes might be of that kind of company or that kind of sector? Kalindi, we can start with you.
So I have a question for you, Shivani. What do you actually mean by COVID proof? You mean that you don't have to do anything for COVID? Because everyone
who's managing to thrive, at least in this time. And I think everyone is affected, but who is able to, stay afloat at the end.
Right. Yeah, I think so. From the CPG world, I would say the essentials, right? Essential categories, personal care, home care, oral care. The basics are thriving because in today's world, just washing your hands, keeping your home clean, like cleaning categories. They earlier in the past, they were almost commoditized. People didn't really care so much about them, but suddenly those categories matter. People are talking about them. People are looking for information about them. Experts are talking about them. Celebrities are talking about them. People are paying more attention to them. What goes in? What's a good brand? Nobody really cared about these categories before. And so, the basic categories, basic essentials are thriving in this COVID world.
That's interesting, Kalindi. I think, you mentioned that things that people maybe took for granted or were just incidental before have become like life choices now. So Anurag, have you noticed anything like that in your experience or, brands that you're observing? Anurag, you're on mute.
Going back to Kalindi's point, right? There are natural winners and natural losers in COVID, right? There is not much to say about that, right? That restaurants lost anything to do with mobility, right? Ultimately, what did we lose? We lost mobility, right? Upfront. And anything that you can relate to mobility, even a deodorant, right, is a mobility category, right? As much as restaurants and automobiles and so on and so forth, right? So all mobility related clothes and fashion and everything kind of lost out. And anything that kind of, helped you without mobility grew, right? So be it all these technology platforms, OTTs, and so on and so forth, right? Now, lost doesn't mean they will go out of business. They are kind of very agile at remodeling themselves, kind of doing many different things And I think if indices are any indicators of future, it says that people are liking it. So whatever they're doing to reduce their cost, to improve their distribution, to find new ways of accessing consumers, to the thing that you're talking about new experiences. So even if you can't deliver your original or natural value proposition, and you found a new value proposition to deliver, all you're doing is you're keeping your customers loyal for the time being, even when your product and service is not available in its original form, right? So I think survival in the future is driving a lot of business changes that you are seeing, right? Um, in my own personal life, I mean, there lots of brands have suddenly become so important, right? I mean, I never thought Teams and Zoom would be like my life, and it is my life right now in every possible way, right? And that I don't wear jeans and white shirts and black shirts is also a reality, right? I mean, preparing for this seminar itself, webinar, I kind of was ironing my jeans, and my daughter asked me, "Why? Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going nowhere. I'm just sitting on a video." And she said, "No matter what you try, nobody's going to see your jeans," right? I said, "But I wanted the least incentive to kind of wear one," right? So there are obvious, changes that has happened, and I mean, you can literally look at everything you do, and say that this changed, and there is not the same as what it was 5-6 months back, right? Including the toothpaste story we heard some time back, right? So, brushing your teeth more often. There's so many new, strange, and amazing things we are doing, which are not recognizable, from what we used to do in the past.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, to Kalindi and you, do you think it has to do more with the abilities that people have because they have more time at home, or, is it that people's motivation is changing to do certain things more and do certain things less, or is it just contextual?
I mean, I think, I'm not sure whether if you've heard of a term called VUCA. So, which is VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So today's world is even more VUCA than ever before. People are unsure, uncertain, their things are constantly changing. They don't know what's going on. And that obviously is going to affect what they do and how they behave. And so, I mean, that's fundamentally what's driving it. And I think what's interesting is that this VUCA world in the last few years, it's been, more VUCA. It's just been accelerated today. And so I think we have to think about it as an increased VUCA world, which is leading to change in behavior, and that this VUCA is not going to go away. The future is more VUCA. It is more volatile, and so people are changing their behavior to adapt and flex with it. In the end, we are human beings, and we all live in a survival mode. And you do what it takes to survive. You do what it takes to stay positive. You do what it takes to stay safe. You do what it takes to stay healthy. And so, I mean, I think it's just all linked back to the mindset of VUCA.
That makes sense. Kalindi, I think. Sorry, Anurag, were you going to add to that?
No, so I was about to give a response which is just diagonally opposite to what she's saying, but I appreciate what she's saying. I think it makes so much sense. And potentially, if you look from an inside world that you are living and an external world that is extremely uncertain, right? I mean, yesterday there was some news around the Oxford vaccine having hit some, some trial mishaps happening, right? And I mean, for a moment, everybody in the house froze, right? It was like, oh, I mean, it was like big and bold on the news channel, right? So I think external world is VUCA, right? But personally, my world has become very predictable, right? There's so much certainty, so much predictability, so much uniformity, right? Everything that creates randomness in my life has gone, right? So my out of home, out of city, out of country, eating, all of that has kind of become like precisely predictable from 7 in the morning till 11 in the night, right? So I exactly know what I'll do every damn day, right? So there's so much predictability, and which has also led to potentially I'm consuming things in a more responsible way. And I would like to believe that that's my psychological development and I'm motivated to do those things, but I'm 100% certain that's not true. It's just incidental, it's just contextual that I'm eating on time and I'm eating healthy. That's because I'm not visiting malls every day or, eating at odd hours in the office. So personally, I think there is a lot more certainty and not a desirable certainty. This is not a kind of certainty that you want, that I like this certainty, right? But it is predictable and certain in a negative way, which is quite strange to begin with, you know.
But does that mean, Anurag, then you kind of cope by bringing or buying things that contribute to the uncertainty, right? So it's almost like an engineered break from what's predictable.
So, you know, I didn't have much time to prepare because unfortunately the original panelist, right, Param had a, is not well, so I kind of joined in. And I was like thinking, what will I say, right? So impromptu. But I did realize that, even if, we are not being impulsive, we are being very indulgent, right? I think impulsivity has gone because impulsivity is again linked to mobility, right? If you're not in and around places with a kind of an environment where you're not thinking too much and don't have too much time or energy, you make impulsive choices, right? But I 100% agree with you that I've become more indulgent without being impulsive. They are thought through, and they're like kind of self-rewarding, right? In the sense that I kind of did everything wrong that I can do, I do, and I feel like it's a reward for all that I'm going through, right? And only future will tell the cost of it. But I think I see that behavior in the kind of things we buy, in the kind of things we order, so on and so forth. Yes.
So just building on the point that Anurag made about his life becoming more predictable as the outside world becomes more VUCA, I think what we're hearing from consumers is that people are bringing that routine and that predictability to their lives so that they can mentally cope with the VUCA-ness of the world. So I think in a way it's a coping mechanism. So I think that makes complete sense. Yeah.
So I think we've talked a fair amount about, the consumer mindsets, how y'all are feeling as consumers, but at the same time, y'all are also business leaders and, people who design for this kind of context. So how do you think organizations need to be set up, or what should they be doing to kind of adapt to this new reality, right? Or what are they doing? Well,
yeah, maybe I can go first. I think the first thing that organizations need to do, and they are doing, organizations that are in the right track and are succeeding, are being obsessively focused on the consumer. This is the time when you can, consumers changing so fast that you need to be responsive to the consumer needs, to the consumer behavior more than ever. And you can't possibly always use your past, behavior precedent for this period. You need to understand the consumer fresh and be completely obsessive with the changes that consumer is making, understanding the context of what the core drivers and values are. So I think organizations that are doing well are being obsessively consumer focused on the changing consumer. I think the other thing is this in this world, things are changing so fast. There's a different rule, there's a different regulation, things are going up and down. So I think as an organization, you have to be agile. Now, agile, what does agile really mean? Because agile can be think of as quick or fast. I think it's not just about quick and fast. It's about progress over perfection. It's not about let's get it right because we have to 100% predict where the world is going. You will not be able to predict 100%. You will have to make hypotheses, choose progress over perfection, and you have to adapt and flex as things change. And so organizations are moving to a more agile working culture, agile decision-making process, because if they're waiting for perfection and complete structure, I think you're not going to go anywhere. So I think those are the two things that I think organizations should focus on.
that's interesting, Ali. Progress instead of perfection. Anurag?
Yeah, I can add a little bit, right? I mean, the way we look at our businesses is that, it's almost like somebody has forced you into a crash test, right? And by definition, crash test is not a bad thing to do. People do it by choice because that's a way to test the sustainability and the strength of an organization, right? So no matter what business you are, you have been forced into a crash test. And I think a lot of organizations are realizing that it's good because it gets you the time to reevaluate your customer relationships, reevaluate your employee centricity. I mean, was I reading some PwC paper or some McKinsey paper, right? And they talked about this fact that, previously CEOs used to talk about, how we are all driven to drive shareholder value, customer centricity, so on and so forth. Right now, the number one agenda is employee centricity, right? Saying we need to be social organizations, right? And even if business gets a hit because you're employee centric, so be it, right? That's a crash test, right? Saying that are you willing to change the core values of an organization? And despite that change, will you retain your business, your customer loyalty, your cash flows, and so on and so forth, right? So I think a lot of that has happened. And there are some obvious paths of agility, digital transformation, new channels of access, and so on and so forth. But also underlying all of these are some of those less visible trends, right? And for instance, right, I was reading this paper some time back, which talked about how there are these accidental and incidental loss of loyalty that's happening. And if you give me 30 seconds to explain, right, it's just opposite to what I was thinking, right? I was thinking people will go back to trusted brands, people will go back to salient brands, and do that, right? Now, I think this is a UK survey, if I remember correctly, but it says that at least some 40-45% of people have tried a new brand in the last 5 months, right? And because they tried this new brand in this negative environment, and we know from our understanding of behavioral sciences that when you get a positive outcome in a negative environment, you develop great loyalty, right?
Yes.
And so these new brands have developed some loyalty. Why did they try a new brand? Simply because of lack of availability, right? So in the first week, second week, some brand might not be available because of huge demand to stock up or whatever. But that's driving a amazing loss of loyalty, right? Similarly, right, as we have started unlocking, you go to marketplaces, you go to your favorite retailer store, you go to your favorite restaurant, and you see a queue outside, and you move away, right? Now, that's not because there's lack of consumption interest. That's because of supply capacity, right? A restaurant cannot hold that many people that used to hold earlier, right? Or a retailer will not allow you to kind of enter a store when there are enough people in it, right? All of these are kind of somehow incidentally, accidentally creating new loyalties, right? And I think brands and, especially high loyalty brands will have to do something different to make sure that they can win that loyalty back, because this new loyalty is being created in negative environments, and that we know is far stronger than what we do in positive environments. I hope it makes sense. I mean,
No, I think, Anurag, I'm also kind of wondering, right? Are people becoming with this whole sense of narrow focus? If you, in a maybe pre-COVID time, you went out to buy something, something regular and it was not available, maybe you just go the next day, right? But now the pressure of having gone to the medical store or gone to the retail store means that you need to get that thing, right? So
yeah.
I don't know if people are a little more impatient and thus less forgiving, of the brand that is not available, despite understanding why it's not.
I think so. I mean, another study that I can recall now is saying that, on marketplaces like Amazon's and so on and so forth, uh, pre-COVID, consumers used to rate, discounts, used to rate customer reviews higher. As of today, the number one attribute is delivery time, right? Which is literally saying if I want it, I should get it, right? And similarly, right, if you're going out, you have spent some energy, some time, taken some risk, you want to return with something, right? And if the other thing that you like does not exist, you're happy to trade it off with something else that you probably did not prefer as much, right?
Yeah.
So those changes here are happening. I mean, they're quite vivid to my mind.
We're getting a bunch of interesting questions. So I'm
But I'd
just,
like to hear,
yes,
Kalindi's
sorry.
point of view on that. Kalindi, what are you experiencing, or what are you seeing or reading about
For
these
me,
things?
I overall look at this entire crisis as an opportunity for big, large mainstream brands. This is the time because of, large mainstream brands are the ones who have strength in distribution and manufacturing, and they're able to tide through the supply issues and, this crazy paranoia of buying products. And as a result, big, large mainstream brands, because people are switching so much more, you're getting new users which you otherwise may not have gotten. You're getting younger people. you're getting people who don't try you to come into your brand. So I look at this as a huge opportunity for big brands and mainstream brands to strengthen your brand and your business. And I think over the last few years, we've been brands have been threatened by smaller challenger brands, but this is a time where mainstream brands have gotten stronger for 2, 3 reasons, right? For availability reasons, for trust reasons. Consumers are, it's not just availability. I think the number one driver for choice along with availability is trust. And so people are putting their trust back into large brands. And so in this whole environment where people don't know who to trust, it's safer to trust people they've known for years, which they might have thought, oh, these are old brands, it's old fashioned, but that's fine. They're back to big brands. And this is a huge opportunity for mainstream brands to really come back and strengthen themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, 100% agree that big trustworthy brands that can signal stability and supply and everything, right? I mean, personally, I mean, forget about research, right? Personally, that's what I would do, right? Go back to brands which are trusted, salient, and I know I'll have them when I want them. I know their life, longevity, everything, right? I mean, that's what you build certainty around these things now, right?
The other one big change, I would say it's not a change, it's just an acceleration of a trend is happening is that, along with, as they say, as Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility. So as people are coming into brands, they are expecting brands to do a lot more for them, for communities. They're expecting brands to be socially responsible. They're expecting brands not just to have a purpose in terms of words, but actual actions, and show empathy for their condition. And so, so I think brands, the future of brands is so different. Earlier it was about selling products and therefore increasing shareholder value. But now the future of brands is about compassionate capitalism. It's about stakeholder value. It is, okay, you're getting consumers, but you have a responsibility to the community, to the society. And I think one of this whole distrust area is really driving that, right? Because people are not trusting the government and large institutions. And instead, they're putting their trust on brands and corporates to do things, to help through the crisis. And so I think this is really changing brand building and brand marketing to selling products to really, truly helping the community.
That's interesting. We have a great question, related to that. It's quite a large one, so I'm going to try to read it verbatim. And either of you who feel like picking it up, please do. It's quite blue sky. So the question is this a time when consumer product companies need to secure their customers by understanding and comforting them at a subconscious level, rather than feeding on the insecurities and fear and responding more materially, pushing the top line? If yes, what are other ways other than sales that this can be done?
I think there are two things, right? What brands and companies need to be doing. They need to be giving consumers two things. Give consumers a sense of meaning and purpose, that they're buying into something that's truly good. And this is not just talk, it's real action, So give people that you're a part of a movement, you're a part of something bigger than you're buying into a product. And that comes from real action by brands and companies, which, I won't get into it, but there's so many companies now are doing so much more than they've ever done before. Genuine, without the desire for driving sales, because your mere existence is you need to provide that meaning to people, that they're buying into something meaningful. The second is, it's not about insecurities, but you need to make people feel safe. So, you need to make people feel that, okay, by using this, you are safe, and in a genuine way, by giving products that are actually delivering to that safety that people are craving. So I think it's two things. Brands need to make people feel safe, need to make people, need to provide meaning and purpose to people.
That's really interesting. I fully agree, I think. Anurag?
Quick point, we know, right, that when there's a crisis or a war, right, we all become cooperators. And when it's in peace, we become like free riders, right? This COVID situation, right, is universally made organizations far more responsible, far more compassionate, like what Kalindi said, right? And so this is not about signaling anymore. You're not trying to signal and communicate and advertise and do some charity here, there, and so on and so forth, right? I think genuinely people are seeing that organizations are working with a very high compassionate mindset. They're doing the best they can do for their employees. They're doing the best they can do for their vendors and partners. They're doing the best they can do for their consumers, right? And I think there's no pretense in it. This is real and people see it. And large organizations are better placed to do it, yeah, because of their access, because of their trust value, because of how many people they can reach, right, with what products and services they build. And I think it's true. There's no pretense in it, and it comes through, right? I mean, not one organization that you can pick up today and say, there is a large organization that is behaving like a free rider, trying to be competitive or take away market share, or that evidence is missing right now totally.
Yeah, and I very strongly feel that this is not a temporary thing. It had already started before COVID, and COVID only accelerated and amplified it. And so if we've done work thinking about what's the future of brands, and the future of brands is compassion, is empathy, is social responsibility, is sustainability.
Yes.
That is what a brand is in the future. It's no more just a product that you sell. But it's a responsibility to the community, and so that really is here to stay. And I think it's not just about brand building. I think it's, as a corporate, it's about overall, we are moving to a more purpose-driven business model across the value chain. It's to all your stakeholders, to your consumers, to your retailers, to your own employees. I think, as Anurag spoke about before, that responsibility and that sense, of caring to employees has to increase as a part of this purpose-driven value chain or business model.
Got it. Okay, I did have a follow-up on a slightly different tangent, but related. So, one of the questions that's come in is this, as we know, from a behavioral science point of view, in times of ambiguity and uncertainty, people tend to be in an evaluation mindset, right? Because you're going through, so many things are shifting, so your own preferences are bound to come under some of these things. So one of the questions we have is, are people trying new brands only out of lack of options? Or is it because they're also questioning and analyzing the brands they engage with? My follow-up on that is, Kalindi, you listed a bunch of sort of criteria or values of a company of the future, right? How do we, in this context, understand what people are looking for? So when we're thinking about questioning and analyzing brands, how do we know what consumers are questioning on when maybe you can't see them physically in retail spaces and just consumer behavior has become slightly less visible? So both of you being researchers at heart, I think that would be an interesting one to hear.
On how do you understand consumers when you can't see them?
Yes. In this current context, how do we know what they are analyzing brands basis now and for the near future?
I mean, we are living in the most digital of worlds ever, and people are always online. Just go on and follow a few things on Instagram, on Facebook, on any social media. Look at blogs. You'll get such a good understanding of what people are thinking and what they want and what they need. And using different tools which are more digital, I think it's not difficult to get consumer understanding on how things are evolving and how things are changing. Yeah. You don't need to talk to a person anymore to understand it. This is all what is behavioral science. You observe, you look at the conversations, you look at what's going on, and I think you can pretty much understand like where the interest lies and how people are making decisions.
Again, I don't think this is a new trend, right? I think gradually we are moving into a space where we are trying to research natural utterances of consumers rather than provoked utterances in a research situation, right? And whether it's a digital footprint or a customer service call center, wherever, right? I mean, people are leaving so much behind for you to kind of, assemble, arrange, make insights from, right? And I think there is no dearth of how much research we can do on what people are leaving behind as footprints. And we can continue to have our obsession with still meeting consumers in, controlled environments and asking them questions. but I think there's so much that they're leaving behind for you to analyze. And in this situation, accelerated because now literally everything is digital, right? So yeah, I think I don't think research is so much of a challenge. It's about analysis and sense
But
making.
Right.
yeah, but I think just to add another point here, as you think about what we should do in the future and what should we innovate around and what we should do differently, that is not going to come literally from doing consumer research. It's going to come from understanding the environment, understanding the consumer, and taking and leapfrogging and taking those leaps of faith to really define what we should do in the future. If you literally are looking at, let me see what a consumer has said, and therefore we should be doing this, you're not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
That actually goes back to your first couple of slides, person and situation, right? I think at this time, over leveraged situation, because situation is the primary stimuli, right, under which we are all operating, right? And so, for instance, right, one can interpret the situation and say, let's fulfill consumer needs, right? But somebody else can interpret and say, no, 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 let's fuel consumers' wants, what they want to indulge in, right? And not just kind of fulfill their basic needs, right? And that's an interpretation of the situation, right? And it's available to all of us, and it's singular. It's not like some part of Europe is dealing with a different stimuli, and India is dealing with a different stimuli. The stimuli is the constant same for everywhere in the world, right? So if you over leverage the context, you will find probably better answers than trying to look at each consumer segment and saying what they want. This is the predominant factor, the situation we are in, the lack of mobility, the uncertainty in the outside world, the VUCA factor that Kalindi spoke about, right? That is true for everybody.
So interestingly, someone has asked a question around, what happens when mobility comes back? And Anurag, I know you and I had a previous conversation earlier today about aggression and how mobility is related to that. So I think they're asking, will people go back to their old favorites with the gusto, that they've been yearning for, and what does that mean, right? Once mobility is back, what happens?
Yeah, I mean, this is very debatable and contestable from every direction, right?
Point.
But my sense is that coronavirus is a stimuli, of course, and it was a massive stimuli, and it changed our behavior very, very significantly, made us more conservative and everything else, right? But there's nothing to suggest that vaccine is not an equally big stimuli, or if lockdown is a stimuli, then opening up is not a stimuli, right? I mean, and as you said, right, we cannot be in a negative state of mind for too long. It's too costly, psychologically, physiologically. Negative emotions are too costly, and we will adapt. And I've seen some. I mean, when the Black Lives Matter campaign happened in the US, right? How many people were outside, right? I mean, how many people were protesting, right? I mean, we saw in India, right? I mean, people kind of going for walks, and suddenly roads are full. And I mean, there was the Disney World when it opened in Japan. Day one, they had a sellout, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if we bounce back with a lot of vigor, with a lot of appetite for risk. I mean, anecdotally, I hear a lot of people saying, I think we overestimated risk, right? And I think, and technically, I think that's a wrong statement. And it's good to believe it's wrong rather than kind of trying to find the scientificity around it. But there is some fatigue with, risk assessment. People want to be aggressive. My problem is that you might not have enough supply to meet consumers' aggressive need for experiences as you go forward, because most supplies will still work with some restrictions, some conservative behaviors, right? So those are likely what's going to happen, to my mind.
I'm not fully sure of your question, Shivani. I mean, is it about mobility in the future, like 4 or 5 years from now? Or is it just before the vaccine comes out?
Yeah. Kalindi, I mean, more like, as we're starting to see, Anurag and I were talking about it earlier today, in Bombay, some of the pedestrian walkways have opened. And Anurag was joking about how so many people who never went for walks now are like on the road, taking a walk just because they can. And that's where I think that whole conversation around the fact that even mobility opening up at small levels, not, the lockdown being lifted or COVID going away even. But as we're starting to find more and more
Yeah, I
room,
mean, yeah.
what is happening with that?
I mean, I'm surprised that anybody even thought that people are never want to go out, which it just feels strange. The fundamental human desire is to socialize, is for pleasure, is for enjoyment. And why would the fundamental human desire change because of COVID? That's not what's changing. And so obviously when people get a chance, they will go out. But I think what we've seen, and I think it's important to look at markets which are opening up, look at cities that are opening up, look at countries that are opening up and see what's happening over there, right? To predict what's going to happen in your country. And so, I mean, I think what we're seeing is that what our prediction on this over the next 2-3 years is that it's going to be a more of hunker down and open out, right? So there will be phases. Suddenly numbers go up, people will go back in. Suddenly things open up, people will go back out. So it's going to be phases in and out. And I think the hunker down phase, home is everything, right? Anything that you can do outside, people would have created and figured out a way to do at home. And so, you know, home becomes your safe zone. And when people start going out, people will start going out. But I think there is a certain amount of cautiousness, deliberateness. It's not as spontaneous, it's not as impulsive, it's not as open. That fear will still be there for the next 2 or 3 years until, you know, things clear up a bit more. So I think it's that hunker down, hunker up phase. It's not a clear, you know, people are suddenly going to go crazy. And that did happen in some parts of the US. It didn't happen in China either. There were only 5% of the population, what they call revenge consumers, that went completely crazy and went nuts. People did start going out with cautiousness, with deliberateness, with planning. So I think, it's going to be, it's never going to be completely open or completely shut for the next 2-3 years. It's going to be in and out. And so we as organizations and brands have to prepare for that in and out, hunker down, open up situation.
Yeah. I know we're entering the last 5 to 10 minutes of this session. So I think one of the interesting questions that came was what would be the aspirational North Star for leader or challenger brands at the end of COVID? So where would brands want to be, or what is the position beyond, I'm sure, revenue targets and things like that? What would the brand want to be at the end of COVID, whatever that means?
I mean, they would want to be at the top, right? Everybody wants to be at the top. Everybody wants to do well. So, I mean, I think what do they have to do to be at the top at the end of COVID? I think big mainstream brands need to behave like challenger brands. They need to be more agile. They need to be more people-centric. They need to be more purpose and sustainability driven. On the other hand, small challenger brands, they need to build their trust. They need to drive their distribution and availability. So, you know, in the end, they need to be like each other in order to win, because a brand that wins is going to be a brand that is trusted, is dependable, but at the same time is, you know, gives people that joy, that empathy, that purpose. So it's like the merging of the two, and that those are the brands that will win.
That's really interesting, Kalindi. I think the point of view of both behaving like both, and that some duality necessary for what is going to be the North Star. Anurag, any thoughts on that before I ask you both my last question of today?
I mean, totally agree, right? It's not a choice. I think it's not what they want to be. There is a path, which Kalindi was talking about a few minutes back. That path is of responsibility, sustainability, compassion, being true. Those are the things that will happen. The only thing that I doubt is what's going to happen to innovativeness, right? I mean, will brands sacrifice some bit of the innovation culture to kind of sustain, I mean, again, you can't become very sustainable without being very innovative, right? I mean, sustainability means innovative, right? Again, new distribution channels, this, that, and so on and so forth. But will we see more new brands, new products, new kind of services in the market? Maybe that might suffer a little bit in the search for more solidity and responsibility. But again, I'm talking like a
I would be
right
careful about that. I think brands and companies across, and anything you read about, and driving innovation is going to be the key to success for any brand, because you have to be agile, you have to flex, you have to meet the very fast evolving consumer needs in a breakthrough and disruptive way, and that is going to be the foundation and the fundamental driver of success, along with empathy and along with dependability.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys. I have one last closing question for both of you. And, there's a lot of trends around, people moving online, people working from home, all this DIY culture, everyone's making bread and dalgona coffee at home. All of that is happening. So what do you think a year from now, one thing that would have changed, one thing that stays the same, and one thing that will never be true again from pre-COVID, if at all? And you can answer this as, a business leader, as a researcher, designer, yourself, as the consumer, anyone. Any lens is okay.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Yeah.
Go ahead, Anurag. You want to go?
I mean, I would take some clues from you, maybe. I, I don't know, right? I mean, I think at a very personal level, I think we will reevaluate what we need to do and what we don't need to do. I mean, uh, there are certain things we'll realize that we really don't need to do. We were just unnecessarily doing it, right? And so maybe they will take a backseat a little more permanently. Uh, the digital fascination we are kind of getting into, it can get into some bit of fatigue that you might say, I don't want to kind of do these things. I want to go back and kind of shop in stores and eat in restaurants and so on and so forth. But I'm sure that people are also seeing the value of it, right? The true value of it. Many consumers were in a denial mode, saying, I still want to do those things and I don't want to do this self-service and DIY and stuff. But I think people are realizing that they are valuable things. They are efficient things. They still fulfill what you want to do. So I expect more stability over there and not kind of change with changing context at a very fast pace. And I hope I continue to travel less. I mean, personally, I think the less travel that I've done in these 6 months, I hope it doesn't change that much. That's one thing I would kind of want it to stay.
Knowing you, I'm quite surprised that is something that you think. But Kalindi, over to you.
I mean, I think I'm going to repeat something that I already said. And firstly, I don't think we should put a time period. We should stop looking at time periods, 1 year from now, 2 year from now scenarios. I think you need to look at scenarios of when will the vaccine come? When will it actually work and kind of be administered? So I think before, I think 1 year from now, there is going to be no vaccine. Sorry to sound super skeptical, but but I doubt that there's going to be a vaccine. So I think until then, I'll just repeat, I think life is going to be phases of hunkering down and opening up. And people will look at that opening up as an opportunity to get that break, to do that little bit of travel, to do that little bit of, the socializing, going out, and the hunkering down phase. They'll go back to their comfort zone and their safe zone, which is their homes. And I think the opening out phase, even if people do it in smaller ways, I think it will for the next couple of years going to be, there's going to be caution, deliberateness, planning, thoughtfulness. It's not going to be as spontaneous. Second, it's going to be socializing is going to change completely. You're not going to meet big groups of people. You're not going to go for events. You're not going to go for sports. Fundamentally, it's going to be planned. As I said, again, the cautiousness. You meet a few people, you meet groups of people that and that's how it's going to stay. And so, even as things open up in small, big ways, it's going to be a lot of cautiousness, a lot of deliberation to that. So I think that's going to continue for the next 1 year. It's not going to really change. The levels of it will change. Suddenly things will be more open, suddenly things will close. So I think we have to be prepared for that personally and as employees and as brands and companies.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one, even as, analytics firms like ourselves, how do we kind of forecast those behaviors, right? And build some preparedness for this trajectory that is not stable, that's like stably unstable for the next couple of milestones at least. Yes, Anurag.
Quick point, right? I mean, a lot of our behavior was also driven by how risk was signaled to us, right? I mean, so government signaled risk by kind of locking down, right? The healthcare community signaled risk by saying how the whole community got fatigued and, what a number of deaths we are projecting and so on and so forth, right? The reverse trend has also started now, right? The government is now signaling less risk, right? They are opening up. The business imperatives are taking place. Organizations are saying, we're ready to welcome you back into offices, right? The restaurants are opening up, right? So I think, our behavior was determined by how we were made to consume risk and not just how we, perceived risk, because the risk was not something that's available in finite,
Yes.
tangible sense to you, right? It was communicated, right?
Yeah.
And I think that communication is changing. I don't know whether it's good or bad, right? But the external environment or the powers to be are suggesting a risk assessment which is different from how they were suggesting it 4 or 5 months back, right?
Right.
And if our risk assessment changes more stably and say that no, actually it's not that risky, right? And with some bit of precaution and mask wearing and social distancing, I think my risk is reduced dramatically, right? It could lead to more, more sustainable behaviors in the near future, right? Because I don't think consumers are going to reassess risk many times, right? I mean, personally, I've started feeling less risk now because of all that I'm seeing, right? I'm saying if officers are willing to welcome me back, if the government is saying lockdown is over, if some vaccine is coming, if death rates have plateaued, everything else, suddenly it feels like there's this risk.
Yeah.
Right?
Interesting. All right. I know we are 1 minute over time. I also know you might be seeing a feedback form in your chat. So I request everyone before you drop off, if you could just please respond to that. A huge thank you to the 100-odd people who stuck with us through most of this hour. And for everyone who sent in your questions, thank you so much. I tried to get through all of them. And I'm sorry if I couldn't ask all the questions that you have, but I'm sure you could reach out to us in another capacity, and we'd be happy to, share back with you. Thank you, Kalindi, for making the time. We have bothered you many times over the last couple of weeks to prepare for this, and it's amazing that it's already over. Thanks, Anurag, for stepping
Thank
in
you.
and giving us so much perspective that did not seem last minute at all. Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you, Shivani, and to the
Thanks.
faculty
Bye.
team. Thanks
All
very
right.
much.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody. Have a good rest of the week.